All right. Hey guys, gonna hit up here research methods today. So it kind of sounded like you guys prefer that I just go ahead and watch those AP Psych videos, which like I said are 30, 45 minutes, and then I'll just condense it down as quickly as I can, but still trying to get across to you guys everything you need to know. Okay, so basically this new guy, he talked about 7 different research methods that are commonly found in the world of psychology. So he did experiments, correlational studies, survey, naturalistic observation, case studies, longitudinal studies, and cross-sectional studies. Now, the first one, experiments, that's basically anytime you are intentionally manipulating something, such as like potential medication versus placebo, right? He actually is saving that for the next video. And so he only did, 2 through 7. So the first one there would be correlational studies. That is trying to identify a relationship between any two things, right? Any two events, any two, groups, whatever it might be. So trying to identify a relationship between two events, such as, again, waking up, the time you wake up and the sunrise, online learning and AP scores, ice cream sales and murder rates, right? So you can have a correlation, you can have a strong correlation, you can have a weak correlation, you can have no correlation, you can have positive correlation, you can have negative correlation. And the way, you kind of measure that is a scatter plot, right? And we'll look at that a little bit more later. So that's correlational studies. A survey, essentially a questionnaire, right? You can make it up. Some of you guys have probably taken surveys. Some of you guys maybe even made surveys. So a survey that's cheap, it's easy. You can have 100 questions, right? So it can encompass a wide range of topics and details. The negatives there is, you can definitely put bias into the questions, right? So you can definitely try to lead the person taking the survey one way or the other, just based on the wording of the questions. Sometimes, those, again, disadvantage or negative here, sometimes the people taking it don't really care, right? So you might not actually get truthful or accurate results because they might not care about the questions or what they're asking. Sometimes they could misinterpret the questions, and because surveys are kind of supposed to be taken by the person on their own, they don't always have the luxury of asking for clarification, right? So misinterpretation. And then surveys, really, because it's probably, strongly agree, somewhat agree, disagree, strongly disagree, because it's kind of on a spectrum. It's really tough to get detailed results or in-depth results. So the results of these surveys are kind of considered shallow. Meaning it might give you the tip of the iceberg, but you don't get to see, a lot of the details. Naturalistic observation, again, that is the researcher, the psychologist, observing, a person in the study in their natural setting, right? You are not manipulating them whatsoever. You are not interacting with them. You're not, really hands-on at all. You are just letting the person engage in their typical setting, in their typical day. So with naturalistic observation, it's unmanipulated. It gives you very real, very raw results because you are not interfering whatsoever. But because of that, there is no real control by the person running the experiment, right, so to speak. Case studies, that's going to be kind of one person or a few people or a small group. So the advantage there, again, you get a lot of detail, right? You learn instead of shallow results, you get pretty real results, right? Pretty in-depth, because you are only studying one person or a small group over an extended period of time. But there's a lot of information you can gather there. The difficult, in the most famous example would probably be Phineas Gage, right? That once he survived that injury, they were able to follow him for quite a long time and learn a lot about him, right? In a lot of detail. The problem being with case studies, though, is even though it's very in depth, even though it's very detailed results, That doesn't mean you can apply it to every single person out there, right? That doesn't mean you can apply it to the masses, right? It applies to that one group or that one person, but that doesn't mean, the results are applicable to everybody, right? In different situations. Longitudinal studies, that follows, again, one group, maybe one person over a period of time. Case studies and longitudinal studies can kind of obviously work hand in hand. But it goes over, again, one group over a period of time. A famous example would be studying, let's just say, sixth grade students, right, in New Orleans who were impacted by Hurricane Katrina years ago, right? So as New Orleans was basically wiped out, schools were kind of shut down, families were displaced. A good longitudinal study would be, studying these group of fifth graders, and how the hurricane and how being displaced impacted their academic progress. Cross-sectional studies, that compares two groups again. So this would be a kind of correlational study. Cross-sectional, compares two groups, males versus females, right? In certain situations, maybe, inner city students versus country community or rural community students. Maybe the personalities of Marvel fans versus DC fans. Maybe it could be the academic achievement or the discipline behavior stats of sophomores versus juniors, right? So anytime you're comparing two different groups or two different sections, that is cross-sectional. Okay, so getting into correlational or correlation, we use scatter plots, and we'll look at this later, but scatter plots, are going to track correlation coefficients, right? So this number that kind of tells you how strongly something is correlated, right? So that is measured between 1.0 all the way down to negative 1.0. And the closer you are to 1.0, such as 0.99, that is a very strong positive correlation, right? So ice cream sales and murder rates are both going up. They're both increasing. They are both positively correlated, right? And we will look at that later. No correlation. The dots on the scatter plot are just random, right? They're dispersed. There is no linear, movement. They're not going up in a line. They're not going down in a line. So that would be kind of a no correlation. Survey. Okay, so survey cannot prove any kind of causality between, whatever is being studied. It might show some correlation, but just a shallow level. Natural observation, two things that the teacher really wanted to get across was the Hawthorne effect, which is people behave differently when they know they're being watched, right? So you can kind of think of yourself, not being watched at all. Driving, for example, you might be singing your head off, right? You might be dancing, you might be staring out the window, you might even check your phone, right? But if you know that your parent is watching you, or if you know that the driver's ed teacher is watching you, right? The hands are probably tending to, the eyes are forward, the phone is put away, right? Your behavior is going to be much different when you know you are being watched, right? So that is the Hawthorne effect. The other one would be demand characteristic. And demand characteristic is if you know you are actually participating in a study, right? Maybe you signed up for it, or maybe a teacher or a psychologist told you ahead of time. They came in the classroom and said, hey, we're going to be watching, do everything normal, right? Behave normal, pretend we are not there, but we are going to be watching you. We are going to be charting some stuff. Now, what would go through your head? Because you are being watched, that might impact your behavior. And let's just say, for example, they tell you, hey, guys, do what you usually do, pretend we're not here. We just want to make sure, or we just want to chart how many of you can pay attention for more than 10 minutes, right? Because that is being charted, because you're being observed, your attention span is being observed, you are more likely to focus to give them what they want, right? So you're more likely to be, all right, hey, I'm gonna be attentive. I'm going to be zoned in for at least 15 minutes. And that impacts your behavior, right? That kind of indirectly manipulated you being natural versus unnatural. So that's the main characteristic. With naturalistic observation, they don't have control, right? So they can't throw something at you. They can't manipulate anything. They lose track of some of the control there. And again, it cannot prove causality. Case study. So I don't know if any of you guys have seen it. It's kind of a longer movie, 80s maybe, early, I'm not sure. But Rain Man, famous Tom Cruise, and I think is it Dustin Hoffman? But he's kind of on, I think he's on the autism spectrum. Brother, I mean, no social skills whatsoever, zero, absolutely zero. In fact, he has been hospitalized for his issues. I apologize, I should have checked before I started this, but I think he's Asperger's or autism. But anyways, he is incredible with numbers, right? And at one point in the movie, somebody drops like a small case of toothpicks, and boom, right away he says exactly how many were dropped, right? So you think about those games. Here's a massive big jar of marbles. Who can guess the closest to the amount? He would be phenomenal at that, right? And what happens is he ends up going to Vegas. Tom Cruise's brother, who's savvy, Tom Cruise takes him to Vegas, and he basically has him count cards and play all these games. And because numbers really register to this guy, they make a lot of money, right? Well, so that is based off of someone named Kim Peek. And so psychologists study Kim Peek over an extended period of time, but just Kim Peek, right? And they want to see, just studying Kim Peek, right, this case study, if they can learn more about people who are savants, or people who might really lack these social skills, such as people with autism, but have these amazing mathematical, scientific skills. So it was very time consuming. They studied Kim Peek for years, and they learned a lot of information, but that does not mean you can apply it to the rest of the population, right? So case study, longitudinal, again, looking at someone, someone like, what's the kid's name? Was it Bobby Fischer? A child prodigy with chess, and you study just Bobby Fischer for years, right? And you learn a whole lot about Bobby Fischer, and a lot of information, a lot of detail, that you can gain from studying someone for over years. But again, even though you learned about him, how much he changed, whether it be personality or attitude or expectations, intelligence, you learned a lot of how they change over a course of 10 years. That doesn't mean you can apply it to every other child prodigy, right? So something could be going on right now with longitudinal studies would be, again, studying fourth graders, fifth graders, whatever it might be, that have now been isolated at home and been forced into I guess e-learning or digital learning, and how does that impact them moving forward, right? You could look at test scores versus kids who were not subjected to e-learning. So it's nice because you can uncover, I guess, confounding variables, right, with longitudinal studies, because you have a long period of time that you're running this study. So maybe you can identify more confounding variables. And something nice about cross-sectional and longitudinal is it can be used with other methods as well, right, such as surveys or naturalistic observation, case studies, obviously. You can even do experiments. So cross-sectional, again, that is two groups compared against one another. It can also be used with other methods. Cross-sectional is not over an extended period of time like longitudinal, so it's more of a snapshot rather than a long duration. But you're using more groups at once as opposed to longitudinal or case study. All right, almost done here. So anytime you're looking at research or experiments in psychology, it is important to keep operational definitions in mind. I know you guys all remember that, but you have to clearly define all important terminology or verbiage in an experiment, right? And the purpose of this is to allow it to be repeatable by others, and that results can accurately be compared from one another, right? So let's just say so Drew Washam does an experiment. I don't know, how does studying impact test scores, right? And he would have to define, studying, what that actually entails: note cards, taking notes, spending 20 minutes with notes every day, whatever it might be. And then test score. What does he mean? Does he mean all quizzes? Does he mean just the end of the chapter? Does he mean end of the unit? Right. So that all of that is defined. That way, Grant Collins can then, repeat the same experiment, maybe enhancing it one way or another and comparing the results, right? And then, excuse me, and then boom, Heidi can do the same thing, right? And ultimately, you're going to gain what's called empirical evidence, right? That the results are valid, right? The results are accurate because they're consistently experimenting the same operational definitions, right? So it have to be defined in order to be measured. For anything to be valid, it has to be measurable. So when you've defined it, when you've tested it time after time, it can be measured, right? And then we look at those measurements and we see if they're valid. Okay, so that is, in a nutshell, that is what he spent 45 minutes discussing. He did give a good FRQ that we will be looking at later, in which you're going to have to look at a survey, cross-sectional study, and a naturalistic observation, and an FRQ that goes along with that. I think it's not going to be too tough for you guys. So basically, I'm going to share this video with you here pretty quick. Watch it, obviously, take some notes down, obviously, as you guys prepare for the AP exam. And then I'm going to post the FRQ, right? And you guys will have all weekend to work on that, to knock that out. Again, I think it's going to be fairly easy for you. Survey, cross-sectional, and naturalistic observation. And then I will, just make sure, we're trying to watch as many of these as we can. I will post, I took some notes down here. As he was going over the question, I will post maybe some tips, some advice on how you should attack this question, things that you should keep in mind. And I will post that. I don't know if it'll be later today or tomorrow with my morning coffee. And again, you guys will have all week to knock that out. And we'll set another live session in which we'll discuss this. But, hopefully, the entire weekend, hopefully that will be enough time for you guys to knock this out. Please, 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 I shared that very extensive review session with you. Please make sure you're looking at that, taking notes down, looking at it. Very serious. I'm a firm believer in 20 minutes of a day making a huge difference, right? And I know you guys have more time than just 20, but if you think you know it, boom, move on, right? If you think you have it mastered, move on. But if you don't, like I said, spend 15, 20 minutes every day reviewing this stuff, and you're going to be prepared, right? But if you think, hey, I'm just a good writer, right? I can BS with the best of them. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean the FRQs agree with you, right? That doesn't mean you are prepared for a biological question. That doesn't mean you are prepared for a cognitive-based question, right? That doesn't mean you can create an experiment from scratch. So still, watch these videos, watch other videos. These aren't the only ones, but make sure you're paying attention to the stuff I share with you. And I know it sucks when you get, a review session that has, dozens upon dozens upon dozens of slides attached to it. But you've got a month. Tomorrow we find out a lot more about the AP exam, but you got probably a month to be preparing. And 20 minutes every day, that can go a long, long ways. Okay. So hopefully this was a good review. Hopefully you learned a little bit there about it. And hopefully a lot of this stuff sounded familiar, right? So I will share this with you as quickly as I can, and we'll be talking soon. My mouse isn't working. This kind of, so I'll just keep talking here for a second until I can figure out what's going on.